The day machines began to replace human hands. England, 1764. A carpenter named James Hargreaves watches his daughter accidentally knock over a spinning wheel. The wheel continues to spin in an upright position, and in that instant, a revolutionary idea is born in his mind. A simple yet profound idea, an idea that would change everything. At that moment, in a small workshop in Lancashire, a revolution was beginning that would transform everything. How we live, how we work, how we relate to one another. A revolution of gears and steam, of fire and iron. For thousands of years, human hands had been the most sophisticated tools of production. Every piece bore the marks of the person who created it. The artisan knew their craft intimately, mastering techniques passed down through generations. There was pride in this work. There was a deep sense of identity. But something was about to change, something irreversible. This is the story of the day machines began to replace human hands. A transformation unfolding over turbulent decades that reshaped society, the economy, and the very meaning of work. To understand this transformation, we need to return to the world that existed before it. A world in which the rhythm of production was the rhythm of human hands. In the 18th century, 80% of the English population lived in the countryside. Textile production took place in homes. Entire families worked together. Women spun, men wove, children helped. It was a domestic, intimate, family-based economy. Fathers taught their sons. Skills were passed down through hands-on demonstration, not manuals. You learned by feeling the thread, listening to the loom, watching experienced hands. A skilled weaver produced only a few meters of fabric per day. It was enough to support a family. The workdays were long, the conditions primitive, but there was autonomy. There was control over one's own time. Artisans owned their tools. A loom cost months of labor, but it was theirs. This independence, even in poverty, carried dignity. This domestic system had limitations. Production was slow. Markets were limited. But there was a human dimension. Every piece carried the identity of its creator. But the world was changing. Demand for textiles was growing exponentially. The British Empire was expanding across the globe. The colonies needed manufactured goods. And traditional methods could not meet that demand. There was a physical, biological limit to human productivity. It was this pressure that planted the seeds of the revolution to come. 1764. James Hargreaves completes his invention, the spinning jenny, a seemingly simple machine that allowed a single operator to control 8 spindles simultaneously, all spinning in unison. Later, that number would reach 80 spindles. Imagine the revolution this represented. The work that once required 8 workers, each with their own spinning wheel and spindle, could now be done by one person operating a machine. Productivity multiplied exponentially. But with every increase came a frightening question. What would happen to the other 7 workers? Where would they go? How would they feed their families when their skills no longer had value? Traditional spinners saw their skills cultivated over decades and passed down through generations become obsolete overnight. It wasn't just economic, it was existential. Their identity was tied to their craft. Fear spread like fire through textile communities. Tense conversations in taverns, secret meetings, desperate plans. In 1768, furious workers stormed Hargreaves's house in Blackburn and destroyed his machines. They smashed every spindle, shattered every gear. Hargreaves fled to Nottingham. He was unable to patent his machine because he had already sold units beforehand. He died poor in 1778. Ironically, a victim of the very system his invention had helped create. It was only the beginning of the resistance, and only the beginning of the revolution. The inventions did not stop. Other inventors saw the potential and the fortune that could be made. In 1769, Richard Arkwright patented the water frame, a spinning machine powered by water. This was an even deeper transformation. For the first time in history, production no longer depended on human or animal muscle power. Water, abundant in English rivers, became the new engine. It never got tired. It never stopped to eat or sleep. It never demanded wages. Arkwright was not just an inventor, he was a business visionary. He realized that these machines were too large, too expensive, and too powerful for individual homes. They cost hundreds of pounds a fortune. They required space. They demanded constant maintenance. And so something unprecedented was born, the modern factory. Not just a workplace, but a new model for organizing production and human life. In 1771, Arkwright opened the first water-powered textile factory in Cromford, Derbyshire. Cromford Mill was impressive. Multiple stories, hundreds of machines, hundreds of workers. It was not just a building, it was a statement. It was the future made tangible. Inside its walls, something without precedent was happening. Hundreds of workers operating synchronized machines under one roof, following rigid schedules, performing repetitive tasks hour after hour, day after day. The factory whistle replaced the rooster's crow. The clock became the absolute master. You no longer arrived when the sun rose. You arrived at 6 in the morning, not a minute later. You didn't stop when the task was finished. You stopped when the whistle blew, 14 hours later. Work was no longer defined by the task completed, but by the hours served. What mattered was that you were there, at the machine, for every required hour. The artisan's freedom, imperfect but real, gave way to the relentless discipline of the factory worker. A discipline imposed by economic necessity and by a new system of surveillance that would fundamentally transform the relationship between worker and work. The 1780s witnessed a cascade of innovations that would accelerate this transformation even further. The pace of change became frenetic. In 1785, Edmund Cartwright, a clergyman who had never seen a loom, patented the power loom. During a dinner with Manchester merchants, the challenge arose: why couldn't weaving be mechanized like spinning? Cartwright accepted it. He visited a factory for the first time in his life. He observed the repetitive movements and realized that any repetitive motion could be reproduced by a machine. His prototype was crude but proved the concept. Within a few years, the power loom became viable. Now both spinning and weaving could be mechanized. The British textile industry became incomparably superior. Between 1785 and 1800, cotton textile production increased tenfold. 10 times in 15 years, an unprecedented transformation. British textiles flooded global markets. They were cheaper, produced faster than those of any competitor. India, for millennia, the world's largest textile producer, saw its traditional industry destroyed. The irony: cotton grown in India was shipped to England, turned into cloth, and sold back to Indians, destroying local weavers. But the true revolution came with James Watt. He did not invent the steam engine. It had existed for decades, but earlier versions were inefficient, consuming enormous amounts of coal. Watt refined the design, creating an engine 10 times more efficient, an engine that could be installed anywhere. It was more than technical innovation. It was liberation from geography. You no longer needed to be near rivers. You could build wherever there was coal and workers. And England had abundant coal, especially in the north and center. Manchester, Birmingham, Leeds, Sheffield, insignificant towns without major rivers, were transformed into pulsating industrial centers. The smoke from chimneys, black and suffocating, became a symbol of progress. Manchester grew spectacularly. In 1750, 20,000 inhabitants. In 1850, 300,000. A growth of 1,500% in a single century. And people came. Thousands, then millions, abandoned the countryside. Between 1750 and 1850, the urban population jumped from 15 to more than 50%, the largest internal migration in history up to that point. They were desperate people. The enclosure of lands, the enclosure movement, had expelled small farmers from lands cultivated for generations. They came with hopes of work, wages, a better life. But who were these workers? Many were women and children, often 3/4 of the workforce. Why? They accepted lower wages, often half of what men earned. They were considered more docile, more controllable. And children had another terrible advantage. They were small. They could crawl under moving machines. They could clean parts in tight spaces where adults could not fit. Children 6, 7 years old operated dangerous machines for 12, 14, even 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, week after week. Factories were hellish places. Loud, the sound of hundreds of machines was deafening. Dangerous machines without guards, exposed gears, suffocating cotton dust in the air, windows closed. Accidents were routine. Fingers, hands, arms amputated by machines, lungs destroyed by dust, causing brown lung. Children were left deformed by work in unnatural positions. Life expectancy plummeted. In Manchester, in 1840, it was only 25 years for factory workers. For the middle class in the same city, 45 years. Inequality was literally a matter of life and death. The price of progress was being paid in blood, sweat, and stolen childhoods, in shortened lives and broken bodies. Workers did not passively accept this brutal transformation. Between 1811 and 1816, a powerful wave of revolt swept across England's industrial regions. Organized groups, calling themselves Luddites, stormed factories at night, destroying machines with sledgehammers and fire. Their name came from a supposed leader, Ned Ludd, who may have been real or merely a convenient legend, a symbol of resistance. But their cause was absolutely real. They were not ignorant people blindly afraid of progress. They were skilled workers, specialized artisans, watching their livelihoods evaporate before their eyes. They were not fighting technology itself. They were fighting a specific model of progress that left them behind, that destroyed entire communities without offering alternatives or compensation. "We will die fighting or live free," they wrote in one of their anonymous letters sent to factory owners. To them, machines were instruments of oppression, concentrating power and wealth in the hands of a few while the majority lost everything. The British government responded with brutal and disproportionate force. More than 12,000 soldiers were deployed to protect factories, more soldiers than were sent to fight Napoleon on the Iberian Peninsula at the same time. Think about that. The government considered the threat posed by workers more serious than the threat of Napoleon Bonaparte. Machine breaking became a capital crime, punishable by death by hanging. In swift and often unjust trials, dozens of Luddites were sentenced to death. Hundreds were deported to Australia, torn from their families, and sent to the other side of the world. The Luddite movement was crushed by the combined force of the state and capital. But its concerns did not disappear. They were merely silenced temporarily. Their fundamental questions still echo today in every debate about automation, artificial intelligence, and technological displacement. Who is progress for? Who benefits from new technologies? And what does society owe to those who are left behind? The following decades proved that the transformation was irreversible. By 1850, Great Britain produced half of all manufactured goods in the entire world. It was the workshop of the world, the first truly industrial nation in human history. National wealth multiplied spectacularly. British GDP grew more in 50 years than it had grown in the previous 500. But that wealth was not distributed equally. Industrialists became immensely rich. Opulent mansions rose in green suburbs. Meanwhile, workers were crammed into tenements without sanitation, 10 or 12 people in a single damp room. Charles Dickens captured this duality. "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times," he wrote. "Never before had humanity produced so much wealth, and never before had so many lived in such misery." But resistance took new forms. Labor movements organized. Trade unions were created in secret. Social reformers demanded change, even some factory owners did. In 1833, the first Factory Act was passed. It limited child labor. Children under 9 were prohibited from working in textile factories. Between 9 and 13, they could not work more than 8 hours a day. It was little, far too little, but it was an acknowledgement that the market alone would not protect the vulnerable. That society had a responsibility. And paradoxically, the industrialization that destroyed jobs also created new ones. Mechanics, engineers, technicians, accountants, professions that required education. The demand for literate workers grew exponentially. In 1870, England established compulsory primary education. Children began leaving factories and entering schools. In the long run, the Industrial Revolution raised living standards, but entire generations died in factories before seeing any benefit. Today, more than 250 years after that spinning wheel fell to the floor of Hargreaves's workshop, we once again face the same fundamental question. Artificial intelligence, robotics, advanced automation, the technologies are radically different, but the dilemmas are the same, exactly the same. Who benefits from technological progress? How do we protect those whose skills become obsolete? How do we ensure that automation frees humanity rather than creating new forms of oppression and concentration of wealth? The Luddites were not wrong to fear the machines. Their jobs truly disappeared. Their communities were devastated. Their lives were transformed in ways they could not control, but they also could not stop the inevitable. Technology, once created, can rarely be undone. The question was never whether machines would replace human hands. The question always was, and still is today, in whose benefit does this replacement occur? The history of the Industrial Revolution teaches us a crucial lesson, one we ignore at our own risk. Technological progress has no moral direction of its own. It is a tool. It can concentrate wealth in the hands of a few or distribute it more equitably. It can degrade human labor or dignify it with new meaning. It can increase inequality to unbearable levels or reduce it through deliberate policies. It all depends on the choices we make as a society, the laws we create, the institutions we build, the values we defend. Technology does not make these choices for us. We do. That day when machines began to replace human hands was not a single day. It was the beginning of a journey that has not yet ended, a journey that may never end, a journey that challenges us in every generation to answer once again, what kind of future do we want to build? And perhaps the most important question of all, will we, this time, learn from the mistakes of the past and ensure that progress benefits everyone, not just a privileged few? The answer is in our hands, still.